Hello and welcome to the Author Switch podcast. My name is Carma Spence, and I have a treat for you tonight. If you have ever wondered what separates the world's top influencers from the rest, well, my guest tonight is going to help you figure that out. And we'll be back in just a moment.
Are you an entrepreneur, small business owner, or consultant looking to boost your authority, influence, and impact? The Author Switch podcast with best-selling, award-winning author Carma Spence is your answer. Tune in for actionable advice, powerful strategies, and engaging interviews to turn on your author switch and take your business to the next dimension.
The Author Switch.
Hello and welcome to the Author Switch podcast. Right here by my side is my guest, Corey. And I'm sorry you weren't able to come a little bit early. I don't know how to pronounce your last name.
Yeah, the best that I can do is Porier.
Porier. Okay.
Yeah, the reason I couldn't come sooner is I'm at the Miami airport, and it took me over an hour to get through security. So I was doing my best just to find a seat to sit down into versus the place I had planned out that I know in the corner where there's nobody. So I'm here, but
Oh my gosh.
there's like an hour to
Well,
get through regular security.
oh my gosh. That is terrible. Well,
It's
I hope you've got some breath and we can have a nice conversation.
yeah, that's my hope, and I think I absolutely think we're going to be able to have a great conversation, 100%.
All right. Wonderful. So, just to give everyone a background about you, you are a multiple time TEDx speaker, a Success Magazine emerging entrepreneur, a Wall Street Journal USA Today best-selling author, and Blue Talks founder. You've interviewed 7,500 or more of the world's top thought leaders, which is why you've been able to discover what their secrets are. And I understand that you have now poured that information, excuse me, into your newest book, The Enlightened Passenger, which is not your typical business book. It is a parable. And we will be definitely talking about that today. I'd love to hear more. But first, a little bit, I don't know what Blue Talks is. What's that?
So it stands for Business Life Universe. And I think the best description I can give for it is if you took Chicken Soup and you took TED Talks and they went on a honeymoon after getting married and had a baby, we'd be the baby. So essentially what that is, or what that even means is that our brand is a mix between spiritual type messages, business messages, life stories, and Blue stands for Business Life Universe. And
Okay.
basically, we bring people onto live stages and have them share that message. We get people in our book series, so they become best-selling authors, but also they get, in a lot of cases, their first experience ever in writing a book or a part of a book. And then we feature them on our podcast and our virtual stage. And the newest thing we launched was the Blue Talks Experts Bureau, in which we actually go out and find opportunities for people. So we pitch them to media, we pitch them for speaking opportunities, and so on and so forth. So
Okay.
basically, it's my way of giving other people what I wish I had when I started my journey as an expert.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't we all? So, was it through Blue Talks that you talked to this 7,500 I mean, that just seems like an awful lot of time. You must have been doing this since you were 2.
I hear that a lot, and so no, it actually Blue Talks is a part of it, but I'm going to say it's probably 1,000 out of 7,000. Where it really started was I started my journey with basically I had a newspaper for a number of years, I had a book series for a number of years, and basically, for example, with the newspaper, we had it for 7.5, 8 years monthly, and every month we needed to do around 100 interviews. So I was the one that did all the interviews, and then I had freelance writers writing them. But because of that, that's where the numbers really got really big really quickly. And
Yeah.
then I just continued adding on to it as I continued podcasting now for the last 20 years. And like I say, the books, doing summits where somebody'd bring me on to interview people on their summit. And yes, it's just kind of, I became obsessed with it. But Blue Talks, like I say, is only kind of a tiny part of that.
Yeah. That is ambitious to do 100 interviews in a month. because my goal was 100 interviews for my book, Public Speaking Superpowers. I only made it to 88. And believe me, it did not happen in just a month. It took a lot longer because you have to book them, you have to do them. It was exhausting.
Yeah, agreed. I've been there. It is really tiring, and honestly, like 100 a month. I mean, if you do the math pretty quickly, what's that? 25 a week, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, 5 days a week. So yeah, around 25 a week. So 5 a day. I mean, you drill down, it's a lot, and I wouldn't recommend it for most people. But at the time, it was really what feeded my soul. Like the newspaper advertising is what paid for it,
Right.
but what drove me and got my mojo working was, like I say, those interviews and getting to sit with those people and talk to them. Interestingly, back then, a lot of those interviews were me driving to their location too.
Oh, wow.
But I was in a small place, really small
Uh-huh.
place, but like add in an extra half hour of driving there and back as well. And yeah, it was honestly a lot. Thankfully now when I do, some days, rarely, but if I do like 7, 8 interviews a day, it's pretty much all online.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, since COVID, everyone's pretty much doing everything online. So, were all the interviews like focused on what their thoughts were, or is it more about how did you get that information that you're now putting into your book?
So it was, I mean, I'm a very, I always tried to find the name for it. And the best I could come up with was an intuitive interviewer. And what I mean by that is I lead with a question. I don't even know usually what it's going to be, but usually I'll start out and saying, I don't want to do stifled bio where I read it. So if you could take a Reader's Digest version, a couple of minutes, and tell us a little bit about your backstory. And oftentimes, what'll happen is just the backstory tells me something that I say I can go down this path. And honestly, I'll do an interview for an hour without going in with one question plan. And so that's where I say intuition. It leads me. So I say this because I'm obsessed with learning how people became the best of the best. And
Right.
so that's where my questions end up surrounding. Now, if somebody says, like I just did an interview on stage at our event this past weekend in Miami, and somebody mentioned that they were kidnapped for 90 days. Well, I didn't know that about them. Well, obviously, I'm going to have to ask questions about that. So that
Yeah.
might not be learning as much about how they built their business, obviously, because that pulled me in a different direction. But for the most part, like if I'm interviewing somebody like, let's say, Deepak Chopra or Jack Canfield, well, I have enough base knowledge of their background. So, for example, I know the stuff like Jack and Mark have been rejected this many times. I know that, Jack and Mark sold Chicken Soup for the Soul, which a lot of people don't know. Like, I know a lot of these things already because I followed their careers. And
Right.
so I want to get to the what do people not know? And
Right.
so, since a lot of people don't know they sold Chicken Soup for the Soul, I sometimes will drive there and see how far I can push that to find out, why they sold it and all those kind of things. So I really try to dig deep for A, what they haven't shared before with people, and B, what are they doing that allows them to become the best of the best. So, for instance, I'll give you a quick example of a question that I would ask. One question, for example, that I asked was Jack. I said, if you had to start all over and you could only do one of the things that you've done that's helped you become successful again, what would it be? And ultimately, Jack said that he would do his hour of power. That's what he does every day. And that's the one thing, if he could only do one, and or the one thing that he would say is most responsible for his success. So to me, that's what I'm trying to find out. Like, what is because he has 64 success principles. So I'm saying, what's the most important one? And of course, I'll tell you, Karma, he said, I have to say that there's 64. You're supposed to use them all. And I
Right.
said, well, I can't go to people and tell them they have to do 64 things.
Yeah. Right.
And I pushed him.
Top
And
three.
yeah, exactly. Even if it was three, but I pushed him for one and he gave me that one. But what I was trying to find out is if that's been most responsible for Jack's success, maybe we all should be learning from that one thing. And by the way, I started using that hour of power and it transformed my life. And really what it was is every day at the start of his day, he spends 20 minutes exercising, 20 minutes learning, and 20 minutes meditating. So I always say what Jack's doing that way is he's feeding his mind, body, and spirit before most people wake up for the day.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answered the question, but those are the kind of questions that I go into to try to bring out of people what they're doing that other people can learn from, that other people aren't doing. And
Right.
I'll tell you the biggest reward for me is whenever I'll do an interview. And so Lisa Nichols is an example. So Lisa was in The Secret. She's been on Oprah multiple times. And I asked Lisa some questions. And at the end of the interview, she said, "You brought stuff out of me that I've never shared in my life after thousands of interviews." Well, that's the reward.
Right.
'Cause that means that she shared stuff that nobody else has got out of her, but it also means as a listener, we're hearing stuff that she hasn't said in all those interviews before. So
Right.
that's what kind of drives me, figuring out what people haven't shared and also deciphering it in a way that we can all say, "Oh, I could do that. That sounds pretty
Right.
straightforward."
Right. And it's not like you can ask the question, so what have you not shared before? Can you share that?
Yeah, you're right. That's a great question. Um, that's also a question that you could ask directly. And what I find sometimes, though, it's interesting. That's the kind of question that puts them on the spot because they have to
Yeah,
really think, especially if somebody like, again, going back to Jack Canfield, 5,000 plus interviews. So for him to try to figure out what haven't I shared, it's
exactly.
really hard. But at the same time, even just getting them to think that way might actually add a lot of magic to the interview for him because after 5,000 interviews, you're probably, to a large degree, you're polished and you're on autopilot. So you can
Right.
almost answer anything because you've answered a similar question before. So yeah, I mean, you could directly say, "What haven't you shared before?" Just
But
as simple as
I
that.
can't imagine it would be easy to come up with that answer. There'd probably
No,
a lot
and
of dead air.
yeah, that's why I said you'll put them on the spot probably, and it'll be a pattern interrupt for sure. And the
Yeah.
thing is, you don't want to say in advance what haven't you shared before, because then they'll plan an answer, which
Right.
could be a planned answer that they've shared before without realizing it.
Exactly.
It's tough. And you know what? When I think about it, like after doing thousands of interviews and being interviewed thousands of times myself, if somebody said to me, "What haven't you shared before?" and people have asked me that, and often I have to sit with it for a couple minutes and think, you
Yeah.
know, what what haven't I shared? Like what's something I haven't shared? And like it could be so random. Like I'll give you an example. When I just thought of it myself, one of the
Yeah.
things that popped into my head was when I first started my journey, it was really hard to get media and exposure and all those things. And so how I got one of the things that helped launch me was early on being a best-selling author. It has cachet now, but it had even more back then. And so one of the things is I realized I didn't know enough about a book, launching a book, even writing a full book. And I was at stall for like 5 years of saying I was going to write a book and not doing it. So somebody approached me and I signed up for an anthology book, and I paid back then, this is going back like 18 years, but I paid $350. And
Oh,
that's an
it's
example.
way more than that now.
Well, exactly. But what I'm saying is that that's something I haven't shared before that I paid to be in that book. And that's
Yeah.
something I've been talking about a lot lately because so many people think that nothing is pay to play, when in fact, a lot of it is becoming that way. What I'm getting at is if I had to think what's something I haven't shared, well, something I haven't shared is, even though it might be a common sense expectation that I paid, nobody knows that I did. And so when back then, I guarantee you, none of our friends that were supporting the book and everything said, "Oh, they must have paid to be in the book." They just thought, "Oh, somebody invited them to be in the book because their story's special."
Right.
So that's something, I guess, it's a weird direction to go, but that's something as an example. When I thought, what's something I haven't shared? There's one thing, but
Yeah.
it's not easy to come up with something. So I love the question. I should explore it more.
Right. Exactly.
Just asking directly.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we go for a quick break, what are the top top three mindsets that all these people that you've interviewed, what do you think they share? What's the through line?
So honestly, there's a couple. I mean, there's many, really. I would never try to take enough time to go through 10, for example, but there's many. But if I look at what's the most common one, if we dialed it down to one, it's that they figured out what their purpose is and they live every day on purpose.
Wow. That is powerful. That is powerful.
I have to add, if you've ever heard of the Blue Zones, where they've studied the longest living people, and then they also did a separate Blue Zone studies around the happiest people, and they found like 5 regions in the world where they live. And this guy named Dan Boutner did like a 25-year study. Interestingly, the only one trait that crosses over, or one commonality that crosses over fully, is the happiest people and the longest living people all have meaning in their life, meaning they all live on purpose.
Wow.
So it's been my discovery in thousands of interviews, and it's also what they discovered in their entire research process as well.
That is amazing. All right, we're going to break for real quick. Have you ever felt overwhelmed with book ideas? Either you had too many and couldn't choose, or you struggled with coming up with just one in the first place. Trust me, you're not alone. It's a maze out there, but guess what? I've been through it, and I've got the map. Hi, my name is Carma Spence, and I've shared this map in my new book, It All Starts With an Idea, now available on Amazon. It's like GPS, but for book ideas. Whether you're a seasoned author or just starting out, this is the compass you've been seeking. Are you ready to embark on a game-changing journey? Let's do it together. Order your copy now on Amazon. Hello and welcome back to the Author Switch podcast. I am Carma Spence and I help entrepreneurs write a lead attracting book in 90 days or less. And I am talking to Corey Porier.
Yeah, like I said, that's as good as I can do. It's a very French name, and I don't speak a word of French, so
It's your name and you can't pronounce it. Great.
the way most English people pronounce it is how I do, which is Poirier.
Porier.
But if like I'm the other side of my name is Dusac, the other side of my family, which is completely French as well. And if you are somebody that my grandfather, he pronounces it Poirier because he lived in English communities most of his life. But if he was up west, they called it, where most of the French community is, they would say it like Poirier or something. They would like roll their R's and they sound really sexy. Mine is flat English. But most of the people that I grow up around that have the same last name that are English speaking say it the exact same way.
Okay, well, that's good. So before the break, I asked you what were the top 3 mindsets that these thought leaders had, and you shared one, which is that they lived on purpose.
Yeah.
What would the other 2 be?
Well, in my new book, it's called The Enlightened Passenger. And in that book, I share some of these things, these top traits. And one of the ones that I really have been talking about a lot, because I don't realize, and I'll say I don't think enough people realize how crucial it is. The top thought leaders, they say no many times more than the average person. Now, that exact number could be anywhere from 20 times to 50 times more. So I've been saying we need to start making no the new yes. But basically, what it means is that most people say yes to everything and then try to figure out how to fit it all in. And then a lot of times lose their sanity trying to do it. What I found that top thought leaders do really well, and by the way, if they can't do it really well, they hire somebody who can do it for them. But they actually keep everything out other than those few things that'll move the needle for them.
Right.
So in other words, if to give an example, I have a personal mission statement, which is something I stand behind. By the way, it's another thing I've noticed with common top thought leaders that's common is that they all have mission statements, whereas most people don't. And companies do, but most people don't. So I have a mission statement that says to be the guy that motivates, donates, educates, inspires, and entertains. That's in my wallet right now. And what that allows me to do is figure out quickly what a no and a yes is. So if you ask me to take something on and it's 0 of those, it's the easiest no without regret. If you ask me to take on something that's 4 or 5 of those, it's an easy yes without regret. So it allows me to guide a decision. So back to the original point, they know how to say no and what to say no to. Now, I just gave you the what to say no to. The how to say no is the harder part, because you don't want to burn a bridge with somebody. Because if every person asks for something, you just say no, eventually people start getting a little bothered by your personality. And so I got this from a lady named Shalene Johnson, who's an Instagram influencer. And I asked her, at the time she was juggling a lot of stuff. She had these multiple training centers where she was running this program called Turbo Jam, which is kind of like P90X used to be. And so basically she had like 600 people teaching her class across America. And so the ones close to her residents would ask her, can you fill in for me tonight? I got something coming up. And she was saying yes, and it was overwhelming her. So finally what she started doing is she was really family and faith-based. So she started telling the person, look, I have to check with my husband to make sure that if I say yes to, it's not interfering with plans he's already made. So if you don't mind, give me a couple of days. Let me go ask Brett. If we don't have anything on the go, then I'm happy to help. If I can't, I'll try to find somebody who can help you. Is that okay? And my point of that is it's hard to get mad at somebody who does it that way. And then what she said was 95 to 98% of the people, when she came back 2 days later, they had already figured it out and got somebody anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a way to say no without regret. It's a way to say no without burning a bridge. And also the stuff ends up getting done usually anyway. So back to the original point, Karma, the number 2 most common trait is they know how and what to say no to. And they understand it's more important to say no than it is to say yes. And then if I continue down this path, but feel free to interject or ask any questions. But the other one I would say is that they know how to hire for their weaknesses. So
Mm,
whether you have a delegation or what that looks like, whatever that looks like, interestingly enough, we're taught in school to focus on our weaknesses. If
yeah.
you suck in that area, so work hard on that. Oh, you're already good in that area? Well, don't worry about it that much because you're already good in it. What I've noticed is the top thought leaders, when they get out of school, they go all in on that thing they're good at, and then they just hire for everything else instead of spending their time doing it. So we're really conditioned, the average person, to focus on what we're not good at and to
Right.
ignore what we're good at. Whereas the top thought leaders focus what they're good at and forget about the rest. They say something
Right.
that'll get itself out. But usually they hire somebody that do that stuff. So it'd be like if you're running a company and what you like being is the visionary person, then you
Yeah.
would hire a great CFO or a great accountant. You would hire a great salesperson or manager, a great, and on and on. But they
Yeah.
know hire for what they don't do well. And so that would be a third one. And again, I could literally go for 10 of them, but that's the top three.
Right. Well, that number two reminded me of something that's really always impacted me is the quote by Zig Ziglar that basically guides you on how to make a decision. Does it move me closer to or further from my goal? Now, of course, you need to know what your goal is, but
Absolutely.
if you keep that in mind, then it makes yes or no very easy.
100%. Yeah, I mean it's so true. And I mean I have to say I'm a pretty big fan of the Ziegler work. And years ago, honestly, like people will say to me, "What are your greatest moments in interviews and stuff like that?" And I have to say that for me, one of the biggest ones was getting a chance to interview Zig before his passing. And since that time, and I'll tell you, I haven't shared this often. This is another thing I might not have shared in an interview, but his daughter Julie, whenever we were lining up the interview, that was after Zig had lost his short-term memory from a fall down the stairs. And
Mm.
so we had to do the interview in a unique way because of that. And after the interview, I think it was after it, but we got on a call. It might have been before, but she had shared with me that they didn't know what direction was going to happen next, where they were going to go with the Ziegler brand. Shared, stuff heartfelt with me about, here's what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. Here's a guy, by the way, the first VHS, for those hopefully that know what VHS is, VHS tape I was given when I started in sales was a Zig Ziglar VHS.
Yeah.
And that's what got me started my sales journey. To get a chance to speak to that person's daughter when they're trying to decide what the legacy of their father is, after 20 years before being the only person I learned from when it came to sales training. I mean, I can't describe what that felt like. And then I've gotten to know his son Tom and done 8 interviews with Tom since then, and got to know him. And Tom gracefully endorsed some of my work. And like it's so when you mention Zig Ziglar, every time it warms my heart, even just to hear Zig's name.
Yeah.
And I will say, by the way, the quote that's kind of one of the quotes that's sort of governed my entire life is a Ziglar quote that says, actually there's two, but one is the biggest one is, you can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
then the other one, which I love, which isn't said as often, is you don't have to be great to get started, but you sure have to start if you want to become great.
Absolutely. He was so wise. He was
He
wise.
was 100%.
Absolutely. Now, you've given us these top three. How do you take that information and turn it into a parable?
That's a great question. And really, let me think. Yeah, all three of them are in there. And I was trying to think, it's funny because when I said I could tell you the top 10, at the end of the day, the 10 lessons that are revealed in the book are very aligned very closely with the top 10 things I've learned, but it wasn't designed like that, meaning it wasn't like I said, what are the top 10? Okay, now let's put them in a book. I literally wrote the book. I had the idea for the beginning, middle, and end. It's kind
Mhm.
of ironic because I'm looking at planes right now, and the book's called The Enlightened Passenger, about two strangers on a plane. So I will say that it was like, I think the book in some ways became written over time before I ever started writing it, based on my life without me realizing that's what was happening. So I
Yeah.
came up with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then I said, okay, where's it going to take place? And I'm on planes all the time. So I
Mhm.
think I was on a plane when I said, where's it going to take place? Well, I might as well do it on a plane. And then the two characters I didn't realize until recently are both actually based on me. Like I didn't
Good.
clue in when I was writing them that the young character, Robert, is an assured business person who thinks he knows everything. I wasn't to that degree, but I was pretty close. And then Treb, the wise passenger, has followed this journey of getting to meet all these thought leaders and sharing the bill with them on stages, which again, there's a part of that that's me. And then even the stories in it are actually real stories from my life. And so in terms of bringing that all into, like you said, these lessons into a book, I think what happened is I wrote the book, I had the idea, I started crafting it, and then those lessons work their way in because it is what I've discovered that will make the difference for people. And I wanted the book to be about life lessons that could make the difference. So, for instance, the saying no versus yes, it's one passenger teaching the other one that, but he's saying, well, but what does that include? Like moving furniture, for your friend. And yes, it can. And maybe it doesn't. Another example is, does that include when you're working somewhere? Like, should you say no to your boss? And the answer is, don't say Corey said to say no to your boss. But, 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 but at the end of the day, maybe you talk with your boss and say, what are some things that I'm doing that I probably shouldn't be doing? Like I'm doing work that maybe you don't even want me to do. So you have that conversation. So what I'm getting at is that in discovering those things made all the difference in the world. I think putting it into a book made logical sense. And putting it into a fictional book is the part that's new for me. And I would love to say that it was really hard and here's what I had to do to make it work. But honestly, because I had a plan before I went into it, when I sat down, everything came to life. Like the characters came to life and the story wrote itself. I didn't stop at any point. I jokingly say this as a songwriter, but I didn't stop at any point and say what rhymes with orange. What rhymes or what's going to fit here or what has to go here. Literally, it came to life. And all I did whenever I was near the end, this is the least I've ever had to edit a book, the least I ever had to, and it went through a publisher and they hardly had to edit it. Like it really came to life in real time. But what I did ask in a few of the things that were removed is, well, is this stuff that if it was my last day and I was sitting with my two sons and could teach them something, is this what I would teach them? And if it wasn't, we removed it from the book. Wow. The other thing I did, which is unique, I think, in writing a book, is because the book, I could tell, was being written in the vein of, for example, an author named Og Mandino. I was reading a lot of Og's work, and the book was coming together in his type of book. Like he wrote parables as well. James Redfield, who's become my friend, who wrote Celestine, wrote obviously a parable. Robin Sharma wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Paulo Coelho wrote The Alchemist. Those books all inspired this, but the style of it and the writing was more reminiscent of Og Mandino. So here's what I do. Whenever I'm running to write a book and I know it's going to be a certain style, I immerse myself, and that's all I read when I'm writing it. So that way, everything that I'm writing comes in that same energy. Because my last book previous to this, called The Book of Why and How, I wanted it to be in the vein of like Dale Carnegie's writing and Napoleon Hill's. So I read Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends. I kept reading those books because those books in 1937 were written in a totally different style than we write in today. I wanted to talk and write in that style. Nobody's ever told me that. I don't know if people normally do that, but to me, it just occurred to me that if I'm writing a book that's going to be in this style, then I should be immersing myself and soaking like a sponge into that style. So that was a long way to say, that's kind of how it came together, but it honestly flowed quite easily as I was writing it.
It's interesting that you say that because one exercise that a lot of people do when they're first learning to write fiction is to like take one of their favorite authors and handwrite, like copy it themselves, because writing it helps them get the rhythm and the meter of the writing. Don't publish it, obviously, it's that person's work, and I know that my early work, I never did that exercise, but I read a lot of Ray Bradbury. He's my favorite author of all time, and so a lot of what I write feels like his work, even though it's clearly my work.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, by the way, too, you run into whenever you immerse yourself in a style, is you don't want to become a copy of, or you don't want to lift their stuff without realizing it, that type of thing. And it's funny I say that because here's something, I can't say a whole lot about this because I don't want to give stuff away, but I wrote this book and I've to this day, I still haven't read all of Og's books. And he has, I think, like 20 some, and I've read probably 10 of them. And I've read like The Greatest Salesman of the World 8 times, 10 times each. But I wrote the book and it's not the same, but there's a little bit of a concept that when I read the book, I'm like, oh my God, that's like at least similar. And there's another one of his books that he, another one of his books he writes about, for example, when he's sharing the bill with, and he lists Jim Rohn or thought leaders from the day. And same thing in this book, I share, like, for example, Les Brown, the legendary speaker. In the book, it says that Treb was backstage and asked him what synchronicity was. And Les said, synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous. Well, Les said that to me in his living room in Atlanta. So it's like me sharing. So Og did that as well in one of his books. He wrote it kind of like as a fictional version of himself. And
Right.
so mine is not me saying it, it's the actual character. Whereas him, he wrote it as Og Mandino, but it's like a fictionalized version of himself. So
Right.
it's kind of interesting because once I started immersing myself more and mine was done, and I was like just going through for edits, I'm like, oh my God, there's even concepts that are similar. Now, I think we both know none of us are creating the wheel again. Like,
Nothing new under the sun.
no, I think it's your perspective on it's new. Like, there's no question when you read the book. That's my book. I mean, the character, for crying out loud, was a stand-up comic, and I was a stand-up comic for years. The character is a tattoo of John Lennon, and I have a tattoo right there of John Lennon. I mean, like, I don't know if you can see it there, but
Yeah,
it's
sure.
totally me, and so there's no question. It's totally me all the way through. But it's interesting. The more you read, the more you realize that we are all ultimately coming around to similar things, and it's like
Yeah.
music. As a songwriter, I've only had one song I wrote that I was like, oh my gosh, that's such and such a song. And it was actually Hurt by a band called Nine Inch Nails. But then Johnny Cash covered it. So I wrote it after Nine Inch Nails version, had never heard it. Johnny Cash covered it, and Johnny plays it on acoustic guitar. And I'm like, oh my God, that's just like my song. But I would have, and probably nobody else would have ever noticed it if it was the Trent Reznor version.
Right.
Still, at the same time, I created this whole new song without knowing Trent's song. And now all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, but that's the same melody.
Yeah.
I think that's the risk we run when we try to immerse ourselves in something, is we might copy it. And so for me, it was really important to make sure it was still original, but it just felt like the same vibe.
Right. That reminds me of a funny story of, are you familiar with The Art of Noise?
Yeah, how do I know that? The Art
They
of Noise.
came out with Paranoia back in the 80s when Max Headroom was part of their video.
Okay.
On that album is the Peter Gunn theme. According to a story I heard, they went into a room, they created a brand new piece of music, loved it, played it for a friend, and went, "Hey, that's the Peter Gunn theme." And they're like, "What?" So they created the Peter Gunn theme without knowing that that's what they were doing.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's funny. I just discovered this the other day, but what's that song? Oh, Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix. And it's
Okay.
funny because I've been a Jimmy fan for a long time, but not to the same extent as other artists. So I didn't look didn't look into a lot of the details like I normally do. And I thought he wrote it, but he didn't. I forget the name of the guy that wrote it, but anyway, there's a guy that wrote it, and he was dating a girl who had a song that's similar enough that a lot of people accused him of lifting her song on purpose, knowingly, and turning it into Hey Joe. And when you go listen to them, there's enough of a similarity that you can say, I understand why people think that. And at the same time, it's enough different that you can say he created a new composition, but he actually copyrighted it before she did. So she couldn't
Oh,
sue him because she never went and
right.
copyrighted it. But it's fascinating. Whoever the guy is, he's dead now, and she's still alive. And I went down the rabbit hole, and on YouTube, she's talking about the song and saying, I firmly believe he took my song, but I'm trying to just make peace with that and just like let it go out into the world. But it is interesting because the question is, if he did copy your song, was it unconsciously because they were together so much and he wrote his own version of it, which wasn't close enough to say he stole it, or did he knowingly say, I like that song, I'm going to make my own version
Yeah.
of it? And I don't know the
Well,
answer.
the world will never know.
No, especially, well, now that he's passed, especially. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, I know that took us down a different rabbit hole, but yeah, I think we just got to be careful that we are creating at least new to us, meaning like we're not knowingly doing it. Like I think if you realize, like if you're a stand-up comic, like I was for years, and that's a big no-no. If you write something and you then realize if you heard it before and you
Yeah.
made your own version of it, that's the type of joke you need to ditch right away. In comedy especially, it's a no-no.
Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, did you know it when you wrote it, and you
Yeah.
go, that's a good concept, I'm going to do something almost identical, or was it by accident because you heard the comic do it? I
Right.
think if you know that you've seen that comic before, you need to ditch the material. If you haven't
Yeah.
seen them before and you discover later they do a similar bit, then you have to make it different. So I think it comes down to, can you sleep at night knowing whether you lifted it or not?
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, we absorb so many things without realizing we're absorbing them.
100%.
And then it comes out with our own lens. Sometimes and sometimes an idea, it's like an idea, its time has come. And it wants out into the world, and it's hitting more than one person at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Honestly, it's like I think sometimes the universe also does pass it to people to see who's going to run with it.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
in other words, they say, like, if an idea comes by and you don't pick it up, the universe, maybe, if you believe in that stuff, maybe thinks, well, she doesn't want it, I'm going to go to the next one in line.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I'm convinced of that because if you know a little bit about the history of Darwin's theory of evolution, he'd spent all this time, he was taking his time to publish it and to get it all. And then a younger scientist came up with the same idea. And suddenly Darwin quickly went to publish so he could beat the other guy, which he did. But they didn't know each other at first. I mean, it's like they found out through the grapevine that they came up with the same idea completely independently.
Wow,
So
it's fascinating, and like you said, it does make you wonder. At the end of the day, was it pushed to both of them, and let's see who gets it first?
yeah,
Or, yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to, did you knowingly do it?
right.
And if you didn't do anything wrong. But then I guess it's up for other people to work out whether who owns it and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, we are running out of time. Is there anything you'd like to share that I have not asked you about?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, for those that are listening that maybe want to get a copy of the book, I would say this, in terms of why get the book, there's two sides to it. One, I think it's a book that hasn't been written yet. But what we were talking about earlier, I wouldn't put a book out unless I felt the world needed another one, because there's a lot out there. And I do believe this is one of those books that can entertain you while changing your life without you realizing it's changing your life. And I like to think there's not a whole lot of those books. So I would make the case for people, you're getting to learn what took me thousands of hours to learn. And by the way, it's a pocket book. It's very small. So you're learning it. It says on the back, the estimated reading time is 77 minutes. And that's based on an average reader, not a quick reader. So it won't take you a long time to read it. But the other thing we've done with it is we tried to make it a win-win for everybody. So because I do a lot of training and teaching and work with a lot of people, we also put together 5 bonuses when you grab the book. So if you grab the book from our site, it actually still sends you to go buy it off a retailer. So it's not like you're paying more or buying through us. But the reason you go to the website to do it is because then if you come back with the order number and you put the order number and you get 5 cool bonuses. So I guess what I'd like to add to people is, if you are interested in the book and you're hearing about this, don't just go grab it on your own. Go to thisisthebook.com. So thisisthebook.com. And when you go there, if you click claim now, it'll take you right down and show you 3 steps. And again, one is to click on the link, and the links are there. So you don't even have to search it on your own. Let's say Barnes & Noble. You go there, you order it, keep track of your order number, just come back to the site, put it in, and immediately get 5 cool bonuses. One of them, and it kind of talks to what we were talking about today, one of them is the top 10 insights I've learned from the world's top thought leaders. So it's like Jack Canfield, The Hour of Power. Like, that's just one. That could change your entire life, and it's just one of the 10. But it's a quick guide, a PDF guide. Also, you get access to a video training that was done by Mind Movies, so the founders of Mind Movies.
Right.
Also, a video that I recorded at Harvard of me talking about what I've discovered the top companies do to be able to charge more than everybody else, like your Apples, your Disneys, what have you. The biggest one is for those that might want to land a TEDx talk. We even included a training I did around a shortened version of how we help people land branded talks. That on its own is a condensed version of our $5,000 program. And so you get all of these bonuses just by buying a $16.95 US book. And so I guess that'll be my, like, making the case for why you would want to buy it, is you get a great book, I think, that could change your life. And you get some cool bonuses that normally people pay a lot more for. But as we know, when people are launching a book, they tend to give away the farm.
This is true. This is true. Well, thank you so much, Corey, for sharing this half an hour, 45 minutes, 40 minutes, according to my little live button with me. And I hope that you do very well with this book. This is Carma Spence saying ciao for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Author Switch podcast and would like to show your support, there are a few ways that you can do that. First, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Additionally, leaving a rating and review would greatly help me reach more listeners and continue providing valuable content. To stay up to date with the Author Switch podcast and gain access to additional information on amplifying your authority, influence, and thought leadership through books, You can follow me on LinkedIn at Carma Spence. For those interested in catching up on previous episodes, including those no longer available on podcast platforms, you can find them all at authorswitch.com/episodes, where you can choose to watch or listen to them at your convenience. Thank you so much for your support and for being a part of the Author Switch community.